Welcome to my channel. Please hit like, share, and subscribe. In this video, we'll be touching on the life and times of Otis Redding. Otis Redding Jr. was born on September 9, 1941 in Dawson, Georgia. He moved to Macon with his family when he was 2 years old and quit school to help support his family when he was 15 years old. He began working with Little Richard's band, The Upsetters, and performed in talent shows at the historic Douglas Theater in Macon. He joined Johnny Jenkins' band in 1958, the Pine Toppers, and toured the southern states as a singer and driver. An unscheduled appearance on a Stax recording session led to a recording contract and his first single, These Arms of Mine, in 1962. Stax released Redding's debut album, Pain in My Heart, 2 years later. Initially popular mainly with African Americans, Redding later reached a wider American pop music audience. Along with his group, he first performed at small gigs in the South. Redding later performed at the popular Los Angeles nightclub Whiskey A Go-Go and toured Europe, performing in London, Paris, and other major cities. He also performed at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. He was invited through the efforts of promoter Jerry Wexler. Until that point, Redding was still performing mainly for black audiences. At the time, he had not been considered a commercially viable player in the mainstream white American market. But after delivering one of the most electric performances of the night and having been the act to most involve the audience, his performance at Monterey Pop was therefore a natural progression from local to national acclaim, the decisive turning point in Otis Redding's career. His act included his own song Respect and a version of the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction. Redding and his backup band, Booker T and the MGs, opened with Cook's Shake, after which he delivered an impromptu speech asking the audience if they were the love crowd and looking for a big response. The ballad, I've Been Loving You, followed. The last song was Try a Little Tenderness, including an additional chorus. According to Booker T. Jones, I think we did one of our best shows, Otis and the MGs. That we were included in what was also something special. They were accepting us, and that was one of the things that really moved Otis. He was happy to be included, and it brought him a new audience. According to Sweet Soul Music, musicians such as Brian Jones and Jimi Hendrix were captivated by his performance. Robert Christgrove wrote in Esquire, "The love crowd screamed one's mind to the heavens." Before Monterey, Redding wanted to record with Conley, but Stax was against the idea. The two moved from Memphis to Macon to continue writing. The result was Sweet Soul Music, based on Cook's Yeah Man, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. By that time, Redding had developed polyps on his larynx, which he tried to treat with tea and lemon and honey. He was hospitalized in September 1967 at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York to undergo surgery. Redding, who was 6 foot 1 inches tall and weighed 220 pounds, was an athletic family man who loved football and hunting. He was described as vigorous, trustworthy, and full of fun. He was also a successful businessman. He was active in philanthropic projects. His keen interest in black youth led to plans for a summer camp for disadvantaged children. At age 18, Redding met 17-year-old Zelma Atwood at Teenage Party. Approximately 1 year later, she gave birth to their son Dexter in the summer of 1960 and married Redding in August 1961. In the mid-60s, Otis moved to Los Angeles with his sister Deborah, while Zelma and the children stayed in Macon, Georgia. Redding and his wife had 4 children: Dexter, Demetra, Carla, and Otis III. Otis, Dexter, and cousin Mark Lockett later founded the Reddings, a band managed by Zelma. She also maintained or worked at the janitorial service Maids Over Macon, several nightclubs and booking agencies. In early December of 1967, Redding again recorded at Stax. One new song was Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, which was written with Cropper. Redding was inspired by the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and tried to create a similar sound against the label's wishes. The Stax crew were also dissatisfied with the new sound. Stewart thought that it would not be considered R&B, while bassist Donald Duck Dunn feared it would damage Stax's reputation. However, Redding wanted to expand his musical style and thought it was his best song. Correctly believing it would top the charts, he whistled at the end, either forgetting Cropper's fade-out rap or paraphrasing it intentionally. Also, Isaac Hayes was producing some of his songs as well around this time. Redding's music made him wealthy. According to several advertisements, he had around 200 suits and 400 pairs of shoes, and he earned about $35,000 per week for his concerts. He spent approximately $125,000 on his ranch and called it the Big O Ranch. As the owner of Otis Redding Enterprises, his performances, music publishing ventures, and royalties from record sales earned him more than $1 million in 1967 alone. That year, one columnist observed he sold more records than Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin combined. After the release of Otis Blue, Redding became a catalog artist, meaning his albums were not immediate bestsellers, but rather sold steadily over time. Classic albums and electrifying performances led Rolling Stone magazine to rank him number 21 on their list of the 100 greatest artists. It was said that Otis had the softness of Sam Cooke and the harshness of Little Richard, and he was his own man. He was also fabulous to be around, always 100% full of energy. Unfortunately, Redding is not as celebrated worldwide as other notables because his death came as he was about to break from a rhythm and blues star to mainstream pop star. Still, Redding remains a celebrated musician. Little Richard refers to Redding as a pillar of rock and roll. Little Richard was one of the first rock and roll stars in the genre's young history. Paul McCartney, following Richard's passing in 2020, wrote this about the departed artist to Variety magazine. Little Richard came screaming into my life when I was a teenager. I owe a lot of what I do to Little Richard and his style, and he knew it. He would say, I taught Paul everything he knows. I had to admit he was right. Richard had a number of disciples following his footsteps. One of them was Otis Redding. According to biography, Richard and Sam Cooke were two of Redding's biggest influences growing up. Redding and Richard were born and raised in Georgia in the late 1950s as he was beginning to launch his career. Redding joined the Upsetters, I said that earlier, which was Richard's previous band. In 1989, Richard inducted Redding into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. During the speech, featuring Richard singing a melody of Redding's old song Lucille, Richard said, I thought it was me when I first heard that. I said, that's me. And when I saw I was his idol, I just loved him being from Macon. One of the greatest singers who ever lived. One of the greatest composers who ever lived. That's including me. Richard was not the only famous Black Georgian who would have an impact on Redding's life. James Brown and Otis Redding are linked together in many areas. They were contemporary black soul singers popular in the 1960s, raised in Georgia, and earned honorable titles during their careers. Brown, the godfather of soul, and Redding, the king of soul. They are also linked together in two anecdotes that could have changed Redding's life forever. Mike Judge presents Tales from the Tour Bus, told a story of how a feud between Brown and another R&B singer, Joe Tex, ended with Brown firing guns during a Redding show. Tex and Brown believed the other musician stole dance moves, but the feud escalated when Tex's singer and girlfriend, Bea Ford, left him for Brown. Tex responded by writing the song You Keep Her, name-dropping Brown. Brown was so angry at Tex that when learned that Tex was going to be at a club in Georgia, he left with his entourage and fired shotguns inside the club. However, Tex was not at the club. Instead, Redding was performing and hid behind a piano during the shootout. No one was injured, though a few pigs behind the club were hit. Brown would connect with Redding and make a fatal decision. According to the Badger Herald, Redding bought a plane, a twin-engine Beechcraft plane, from Brown months before his death. Brown warned Redding against using the plane, but Redding still made the purchase. That December, the plane would crash into Lake Monana, killing Redding. By 1967, the band was traveling to performances in Redding's Beechcraft H-18 airplane. On December 9th, they appeared on the upbeat television show produced in Cleveland. They played 3 concerts in 2 nights at a club called Leo's Casino. After a phone call with his wife and children, Redding's next stop was Madison, Wisconsin. The next day, Sunday, December 10th, they were to play at the Factory nightclub near the University of Wisconsin. Although the weather was poor, with heavy rain and fog, and despite warnings, the plane took off. 4 miles from their destination at Truex Field in Madison, pilot Richard Fraser radioed for permission to land. Shortly thereafter, the plane crashed into Lake Monana. Bar-Kays member Ben Cowley, the accident's only survivor, was sleeping shortly before the accident. He woke just before impact to see bandmate Fallon Jones look out a window and exclaim, "Oh no!" Cawley said the last thing he remembered before the crash was unbuckling his seatbelt. He then found himself in frigid water, grasping a seat cushion to keep afloat. As a non-swimmer, he was unable to rescue the others. The cause of the crash was never determined. Besides Redding, the other victims of the crash were 4 members of the Bar-Kays: guitarist Jimmy King, tenor saxophonist Phelan Jones, organist Ronnie Caldwell, and drummer Carl Cunningham. Also their valet, Matthew Kelly, and the pilot, Fraser. Redding's body was recovered the next day when the lake was searched. The family postponed the funeral from December 15th to December 18th so that more could attend, and the service took place at the City Auditorium in Macon. More than 4,500 people came to the funeral, overflowing the 3,000-seat hall. Redding was entombed at his ranch in Round Oak, about 20 miles north of Macon. Jerry Wexler delivered the eulogy. Redding died just 3 days after re-recording Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, and was survived by Zelma and his 4 children. On November 8, 1987, a memorial plaque was placed on the lakeside deck of the Madison Convention Center, Monana Terrace. Sitting on the Dock of the Bay was released in January of 1968. It became Redding's only single to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and the first posthumous #1 single in U.S. chart history. It sold approximately 4 million copies worldwide and received more than 8 million airplays. The album, The Dock of the Bay, was the first posthumous album to reach the top spot on the UK albums chart as well. Shortly after Redding's death, Atlantic Records, distributor of the Stax Volt releases, was purchased by Warner Brothers. Stax was required to renegotiate its distribution deal and was surprised to learn that Atlantic actually owned the entire Stax Volt catalog. Stax was unable to regain the rights to its recordings and severed its Atlantic relationship. Atlantic also held the rights to all unreleased Otis Redding masters. It had enough material for 3 studio albums: The Immortal Otis Redding, 1968, Love Man, 1969, and Tell the Truth, 1970, all issued on its Atco Records label. A number of successful singles emerged from these LPs, among them Amen, 1968, Hard to Handle, 1968, I've Got Dreams to Remember, 1968, Love Man, 1969, and Look at That Girl, 1969. Singles were also lifted from 2 live Atlantic-issued Redding albums, In Person at the Whiskey A Go-Go, recorded in 1966 and issued in 1968 on Atco, and Historic Performances recorded at the Monterey International Pop Festival, a Reprise Records release featuring some of the live performances at the festival by the Jimi Hendrix Experience on Side 1 and Redding on Side 2. Redding had at least 2 television appearances booked for 1968, one on the Ed Sullivan Show and the other on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. In September 2007, the first official DVD anthology of Redding's live performances was released by Concord Music Group, then owners of the Stax catalog. Dreams to Remember, The Legacy of Otis Redding, featured 16 full-length performances and 40 minutes of new interviews documenting his life and career. On May 18, 2010, Stax Records released a 2-disc recording of 3 complete sets from his Whiskey A Go-Go date in April 1966. All 7 sets from his 3-day residency at the venue were released as live as the Whiskey A Go-Go, the complete recordings in 2016, a 6 CD box set that won a Grammy Award for Best Album Notes. Carla Thomas claimed that the pair had planned to record a duet album in December the same year, but Phil Walden denied this. Redding had proposed to record an album featuring cut and rearranged songs in different tempos. For example, ballads would be up-tempo and vice versa. Another suggestion was to record an album entirely consisting of country standards. In 2011, Kanye West and Jay-Z released Otis as a single off of their collaborative album, Watch the Throne. Redding was credited as a feature on the song. The song was produced by West, who built it off of a sample of Redding's version of Try a Little Tenderness. Also, after Otis Redding's passing, there were rumors going around in the industry, I've read, that he and James Brown and Sam Cooke were collaborating, and they were trying to start their own black music distribution company. So there were rumors swirling that Otis did not die by accident, that he was murdered. So, I guess we'll never really know the truth on that, but those were the rumors that were spreading after Otis passed away. Rest in peace to Otis Redding. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Thanks for your support.